Ari Rosman, I'm here with another fun-filled episode of that 401k podcast. This week we're going to talk once again. It's June. That must be an article about payroll provider TPAs. It is the 16th edition of this article, well, series of articles, because I don't know, 16 are the same, but it's the most famous or infamous series of articles that I've written. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about the topic at hand and kind of the history of writing it and all that kind of stuff. Because I always hear about these articles. But of course, first things first, go to that4ksite.com, sign up. Right now we have Milwaukee up on the board. That's next. I'm recording this episode after coming back from New York, after coming back to New York from Anaheim. I'm recording this on a Tuesday. Usually I record on a Friday or a Sunday or a Monday, but with this crazy week, I have to record on a Tuesday. Just a little bit hectic coming back. I was coming back Saturday from Anaheim, from LAX. It was a 3.5 hour delay because the plane from New York had issues. I think it was weather issues, whatever it was. Came back like 1 a.m. And then the next day, my son, Jason, a lot of people in the audience know Jason very, very well. He was flying to Israel for a 10-day birthright trip in Newark, of course. This can't be JFK, had to be in Newark. So had to pack him, run to Newark for a 4 o'clock meeting with his group. They were leaving at 8 o'clock. And then, of course, I don't think he really interested in it, but it took like 2.5 hours to get back from Newark. But let's talk about the conference. It was a really great event. I talk about it in my new book, which is out now, Full Circle, how I always have anxiety about these events. It's stressful putting it together, negotiating, and trying to get sponsors to sponsor the event and get rear ends and seats from attendees. We had comparable attendance. I'm happy where like Anaheim had comparable attendance to Los Angeles when we did the event in Dodger Stadium in 2019, which was about 6 years ago. So that's that, because I keep on saying that it's difficult ever since COVID to get people into a room. Mark Langston was the guest. I think we've done 21 events, 22 if you count that planned sponsor forum I tried in St. Pete. And it was the first time I ever was, that I ever sent a request to Larry. Larry always gets me some great guests. Some fall into my lap, like Andre Dawson and Steve Garvey, but everybody's been great. But the first time that I ever asked for a guest was Mark Langston. Just growing up as a kid in Midway High School, we played fantasy baseball. Langston was one of those great pitchers for the Mariners. He was a great guest, very personable. He apparently doesn't like to do card shows. I think he should reconsider. I think he's a fabulous guest. He's the radio guy, radio analyst on the Angels games. He's fantastic at what he does. Great stadium tour. Got really close to the grass this time. You're on the field. Took some nice pictures. And there was some great presentations. And of course, I was just pimping out the new book, Full Circle, available now today on Amazon in Kindle and paperback. Hopefully I'll sell more than a couple of copies, but that's neither here nor there. And so Milwaukee's next. I got to work with Larry as to who the guest will be. I just was talking to one of the sponsors of the Milwaukee event. He, one of the regional reps, and we were talking about how in Anaheim, we had one of the plan providers apologize for saying something derogatory about another competition. And I'm not a big fan of apologies. Your feelings, your opinions are your opinions. And so that's just my 2 cents. And, got into discussion about these payroll provider articles. And the regional salesperson for the TPA said, oh, well, yeah, I use that article all the time. And I first started writing, so I've been in practice on my own since 2010. So I want to say a few months after I started, I wrote the first article. What you find interesting is over the last 15 years, this is the 16th edition of the article, you will always find at the beginning when I first did it, Never named ADP and Paychex by name. Uh, that was my intent. We kind of knew who they were. Then over time, I got more and more confidence. I'm like, you know what, just call them out on it. When the articles first came out, the reps for the companies were more agitated on LinkedIn. And I think that that's probably the wrong tact. I'm not interested in rankling anybody who works there. A lot of good people who work there. And it's just an opinion. And I'll never forget one time, I don't know, there was a plan sponsor out there who got obviously one of these articles from a TPA salesperson or whoever it may be. Maybe it was a accountant or whatever it was. And he was trying to debate with me. And I'm like, I really have no time for this. It's like these Facebook community group posts. Like, I don't have time. I don't care about your opinion. I have mine. Mine is shaped by experience. And that experience with having plan sponsor clients has been a negative experience. We are all shaped by our experiences. And of course, pimping out the book again, that's what this whole book Full Circle is about. It's a lot of it. These are my opinions, and I tell you the story of how it was shaped. And listen, if you work for ADP and Paychex, you're going to have a more favorable opinion about their work than I do, and that's fine. Somebody's paying your paycheck. Not everybody's going to say, yeah, you work in a restaurant. A lot of people aren't going to say publicly, the food here sucks. And so I don't think, and again, I did work for TPAs. I would have told them the work here sucks. But that's just me, and in my opinion, I've cleaned up a lot of compliance messes by payroll providers who moonlight as TPAs, and because they moonlight because it's an ancillary business to them. There's a systematic issue with them because their core business is not TPA work, and that's interesting. Because you could say, well, look, all these mutual fund companies, they have this ancillary model where their TPA work is ancillary to their bread and butter, which is selling out mutual funds. But I don't have the issues with Fidelity and T. Rowe and Vanguard the way I do with ADP and Paychex. So I think it's systematic. The problem I find with it, number one off the top, the 360 integration sales piece, the pitch is completely overrated. The big shtick from them, the big gimmick from ADP and Paychex is this 360 integration. It sounds cool, sounds real tech savvy, but it's really a hollow promise. Integration doesn't equal competence. It doesn't, catch plan design issues, compliance failures, outdated plan documents. It doesn't protect anything in the audit. And while it scrapes and cleans up payroll data, it was so critical, there'd be no reason that ADP and Paychex didn't offer that seamless 360 integration with competing providers like Empower or Fidelity or other large TPAs. And like I said, payroll is not their main business. It's just an add-on. It's a revenue add-on. Coca-Cola, like I said, Coca-Cola keeps its secrets on its formula. I'm sure Dr. Pepper as well. But yet, ADP and Paychex kind of offer that integration. That's all the proof you need that it's just not really integral to their brand. It's just an add-on. It's just another product. Pepsi. I have money in Pepsi, in my regular money, and on my IRA, I have Coca-Cola. Pepsi, I always like more. The stock is just not good for right now. For a long time, I think I'm down 20%. The beauty of Pepsi was like, you know what? We're in the soft drink business. What else can we do to push soft drinks? And okay, so they got in the snack business when they acquired Frito-Lay. They were in the restaurant business for a long time with Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, and all that before they spun it out, and probably own still a piece of it. So that's no different from the payroll companies who just see that, another way to push out, just a natural outgrowth of a payroll business is to do TPA work. Because listen, payroll has got something to do with 401k plans, with salary deferrals and all that kind of stuff. But plan administration is not plug and play. It's highly technical, ERISA, Internal Revenue Code, all that kind of stuff. It requires real expertise, and it needs to be tested for non-discrimination, all that kind of stuff. Proper plain documents, 5500s, 1099s. It's a lot of bells and whistles. They're complex machines. This whole plan administration for a daily value participant directed plan. And, I think that this isn't really something that they're very good at handling, and it really shows. Like I said before, the mutual fund companies don't have the issues that these payroll providers do in providing a quality service. That's just really what I found. And there's this garbage in, garbage out problem, and TPAs usually will ask for detailed census of employee data, and they will hold the hand of the plan sponsor in complying this information. And a good TPA, like I said, will just go through the process, explain what's a key employee, what's the data hire they need, and all that kind of stuff. And, you go with the form with the plan sponsor, you get it right. You don't, you're going to have problems. And, if the data you give them is flawed, if you give the TPA flawed data, garbage in, the testing information will be incorrect, garbage out. The problem with, I've told the situation in the past on many of these, podcast episodes. There was once a client who told ADP or Paychex, I don't know which one, that every employee they had was a key employee without understanding what the key employee definition. So the $30,000 person, making that kind of money was listed as a key employee. ADP tested it and said, wow, your plan's top heavy. And it just, had you explain to them that a key employee isn't somebody key to your business, but within the definition of the Internal Revenue Code, maybe they would have filled that information correctly. Then, of course, like I said, that payroll provider TPA tasted that information and, garbage in, garbage out. The plan wasn't top heavy, and there was no 3% minimum required. And, again, they take no responsibility for anything. And rarely, unless you have a large plan, you don't get a point person. Small, medium-sized businesses, you get a team. There's not one person to talk to. It's a rotating cast of representatives who may or may not have ever touched your plan. It's like going to McDonald's. You go to any cashier, it doesn't matter. You call anybody up on the helpline. They're just somebody sitting at a desk who maybe worked on your plan, maybe didn't. And, there's a lot of drop balls in that kind of situation. I always like that one person to contact, the one person you can yell at. And then, of course, we have the issue of plain vanilla plans. They have I always felt that there's been like this one size fits all. They don't, new comparability is not something they really deal with that much, but I know they do that work. They certainly don't do cash balance combinations. I've seen too many plan sponsors fail discrimination testing without there being discussion as to, well, you know what, maybe a safe harbor plan design is good for you. And, there have been issues with plans with brokerage accounts. They don't want to run that, so they create a second plan for them, which just, requires like multiple 5500s, and then they deny the responsibility in the mess that they created. And don't expect them to, like I said, don't expect them to help you with a DB plan or a cash balance plan. Like my friends, and all that kind of stuff, they won't do it. And for a lot of, like my friends at EGPS who did a really great presentation on cash balance plans, that might be a great fit, for a medical practice, law practice, some other successful businesses. And you're leaving money on the table. And that's problematic when you're dealing with somebody who's not sophisticated in plan design. They also offer fund support, where they kind of, how do I say this nicely, wink at you and tell you that maybe you should add a small cap plan, but you can't rely on them for fiduciary advice. There are too many plans out there that they run that don't have advisor on the plan, so they work on the plan, but they offer no fiduciary support. They go out of the way to tell you that they're not fiduciaries. I was in a meeting with a $10 million 401k plan that was a client of mine, You should add small cap fund, but you know what? You can't rely on us. It's the wink wink. You know, they won't be there to help, and I think that that's reckless to administer plans when your plans don't have an advisor. And let's tell it like it is. A lot of the plans, a lot of the business they get is by kicking clients to advisors with the hopes that the advisors will refer business back. I've known that to be a fact, and that's a practice. Again, nothing illegal about it. Um, that's just the nature of the business, of course. You refer people business, they're going to refer it back to you. There's nothing illegal. Like I've done in the past. But I think it's just problematic to have a lot of clients out there with no advisors on the plan. Turnover for these TPAs are really high. As soon as they get hired, they lose a client from somebody else. There's a huge churn rate among payroll provider TPAs. And the administrative staff and the sales staff, they churn out too. So you're never going to have like one person to talk to. A lot of times you talk to a salesperson and within 6 months they're gone. They talk, again, they talk about how much, plans that they have. What they don't tell you is how many plans they lose every year. High churn isn't a sign of success. It's a sign that clients are leaving. Good TPAs, as we know, don't really have a high churn rate. They have long-standing clients. They grow by keeping their existing clientele and adding new clients slowly but surely. ADP and Paychecks grow a little bit, but the loss, the year to year, there's a high attrition rate. And my final thought on this matter is that it's important that, again, I understand the appeal. If I didn't know anything about retirement plans, I would say, wow, that's a great idea. It's like I just came back from Disneyland. It's great that Disney handles all this. It's great that Disney has the Grand California Hotel, which is my family's favorite hotel. They do fantastically well with food, running the park, but, if they brought in somebody else for food, the food might be better. That's not the end-all be-all. And on paper, yeah, Disney doing all this stuff is great, but maybe, there's certain things that another provider that you bring in, maybe if you bring in Marriott to manage your hotels, maybe the hotels will be better for you. It's certainly not going to be better for Disney because there's less money to be made. But it's the same thing with payroll providers. Yeah, it looks great on paper, but if you hire a TPA with expertise and competence, it's going to really help you out further down the line than any 360 integration. Everybody likes convenience, but this convenience of having your payroll provider serve as your TPA will cost you. And that's a huge issue. You need to choose someone who knows how to keep your plan on track and out of trouble. You'll sleep way better at night, and you'll save yourself a whole lot of money. I've said it before, and I said it again. ADP and Paychex do a great job with payroll. I know. I used to work for companies that use their services. But when it comes to retirement plan designs, they're out of their depth. And again, this is my opinion. Like I said in my book, Full Circle, my opinion can change. There was a time where I would tell you, pre-fee disclosure, there's no way in hell you should ever use a producing TPA. Thanks to fee disclosure, the end of the kickback scheme known as rev share, I can say now I don't have any issues. So for 15 years, I've been writing this series of articles. It's the 16th edition. If I saw that there was a change, I would stop writing these articles. I don't generate a lot of business from these articles. I generate a lot of turmoil and interest because people use these articles to generate business for themselves. But in all honesty, that's all I could be, is I would stop writing these articles. I don't write what I don't believe. And if they were doing a fantastic job and they started commitment, they hired somebody that was well known in the business of running a great TPA shop, and that person was in charge, and I saw a level of service that would be fantastic, I would change my mind. Listen, I work for a TPA where their business was bought by BICIS. BICIS was terrible. They switched their name out to Census, a lot better company. It took time, but can't say a bad word about Ascensus. They do a fantastic job. But that's why I say my opinion on now, 16th edition, it hasn't changed. And will it? We'll see. I don't know. I'm willing to change my opinion if they're willing to do a better job at TPA work. And that's that. So hope you enjoyed this episode of that 401k podcast. Tune in next week for another fun-filled episode. Please do not forget, go to that 401ksite.com. Milwaukee will be up. We will have probably within weeks a sign-up page for that 401k National Virtual Conference. I got to look at the dates for January and February, see what works, because we may have a event in Las Vegas next January. We'll see. So that's a little bit up in the air. It depends on the Rangers schedule with the Golden Knights, honestly. Full Circle, now available. Kindle, paperback, Amazon.com. Check it out. A really fun book that I wrote. Probably one of the best things I've ever written. A lot of, it's kind of like Andy. I see myself sometimes as Andy Dufresne, tunneled through a lot of shit in business and in life, and it's all there for the first time and the only time for a lot of these topics. We're already beginning work on the 4th book, which will only be about 401k plans. I think I've said all I needed to say on familial crap and law school crap and all that stuff. So again, hope to see you again next week for another fun-filled episode of that 401k podcast. Take care. Bye.